In their eyes I was worse than a thief or a murderer. As much as they disapproved of such outlaws, they didn't treat them as if they were invisible. When it came to me, however, all they saw was death staring them in the face. That's what scared them, to recognize that death could be this close and this ugly. Suddenly there was a great commotion in the background. I heard somebody yell, "He is coming! He is coming!" Sure enough, there was Rumi, riding a horse as white as milk, wearing an exquisite amber kaftan embroidered with golden leaves and baby pearls, erect and proud, wise and noble, followed by a throng of admirers. Radiating an air of charisma and confidence, he looked less like a scholar than a ruler, the sultan of the wind, the fire, the water, and the earth. Even his horse stood tall and firm, as if aware of the distinction of the man he carried. I pocketed the coins in my bowl, wrapped my head so as to leave half of my face in the open, and entered the mosque. Inside, it was so packed it seemed impossible to breathe, let alone find a seat. But the one good thing about being a leper was that no matter how crowded a place, I could always find a seat, since nobody wanted to sit next to me. "Brothers," Rumi said, his voice rising high, sweeping low. "The vastness of the universe makes us feel small, even inconsequential. Some of you might be asking, what meaning could I, in my limitedness, possibly have for God? This, I believe, is a question that has occurred to many from time to time. In today's sermon I want to generate some specific answers to that." Rumi's two sons were in the front row, the handsome one, Sultan Walid, who everyone said resembled his late mother, and the young one, Aladdin, with an animated face but curiously furtive eyes. I could see that both were proud of their father. The children of Adam were honored with knowledge so great that neither the mountains nor the heavens could shoulder it, Rumi continued. That is why it says in the Quran, "Truly we offered the trust to the heavens and the earth and the mountains, but they refused to bear it because they were afraid of it. Only man took it up." Having been given such an honorable position, human beings should not aim any lower than what God had intended. Pronouncing his vowels in that strange way only the educated are capable of, Rumi talked about God, assuring us that he dwelled not on a distant throne in the sky but very close to each and every one of us. What brought us even closer to God, he said, was none other than suffering. Your hand opens and closes all the time. If it did not, you would be paralyzed. Your deepest presence is in every small contracting and expanding. The two are as beautifully balanced and coordinated as the wings of a bird. At first I liked what he said. It warmed my heart to think of joy and sorrow as dependent on each other as a bird's wings. But almost instantly I felt a wave of resentment rise up in my throat. What did Rumi know about suffering? As the son of an eminent man and heir to a wealthy, prominent family, life had always been good to him. I knew he had lost his first wife, but I didn't believe he had ever experienced real misfortune. Born with a silver spoon in his mouth, raised in distinguished circles, tutored by the best scholars, and always loved, pampered, and admired, how dare he preach on suffering? With a sinking heart, I realized that the contrast between Rumi and me couldn't be greater. Why was God so unfair? To me he had given poverty, sickness, and misery. To Rumi riches, success, and wisdom. With his flawless reputation and royal demeanor, he hardly belonged to this world, at least not to this city. I had to cover my face if I didn't want people to be revolted by the sight of me, while he shone in public like a precious gem. I wondered how he would fare if he were in my shoes. Had it ever occurred to him that even someone as perfect and privileged as he could someday tumble and fall? Had he ever contemplated how it would feel to be an outcast, even for one day? Would he still be the great Rumi if he had been given the life I was given? With each new question, my resentment rose, sweeping away whatever admiration I might otherwise have had for him. Bitter and petulant, I stood up and pushed my way out. Several people in the audience eyed me curiously, wondering why I was leaving a sermon that so many others were dying to attend. Shams, Konya, October 17, 1244. Beholden to the peasant who dropped me off at the town center, I found myself and my horse a place to stay. The inn of sugar vendors seemed just what I needed. Of the 4 rooms I was shown, I chose the one with the fewest possessions, which consisted of a sleeping mat with a moldy blanket, an oil lamp that was sputtering its last, a sun-dried brick that I could use as a pillow, and a good view of the whole town up to the base of the surrounding hills. Having thus settled down, I roamed the streets, amazed at the mixture of religions, customs, and languages permeating the air. I ran into gypsy musicians, Arab travelers, Christian pilgrims, Jewish merchants, Buddhist priests, Frankish troubadours, Persian artists, Chinese acrobats, Indian snake charmers, Zoroastrian magicians, and Greek philosophers. In the slave market, I saw concubines with skin white as milk and hefty, dark eunuchs who had seen such atrocities that they had lost their ability to speak. In the bazaar I came across traveling barbers with bloodletting devices, fortune tellers with crystal balls, and magicians who swallowed fire. There were pilgrims on their way to Jerusalem and vagrants who I suspected were runaway soldiers from the last crusades. I heard people speak Venetian, Frankish, Saxon, Greek, Persian, Turkish, Kurdish, Armenian, Hebrew, and several other dialects I couldn't even distinguish. Despite their seemingly endless differences, all of these people gave off a similar air of incompleteness, of the works in progress that they were, each an unfinished masterwork. The whole city was a Tower of Babel. Everything was constantly shifting, splitting, coming to light, transpiring, thriving, dissolving, decomposing, and dying. Amid this chaos I stood in a place of unperturbed silence and serenity, utterly indifferent to the world and yet at the same time feeling a burning love for all the people struggling and suffering in it. As I watched the people around me, I recalled another golden rule: it's easy to love a perfect God, unblemished and infallible that He is. What is far more difficult is to love fellow human beings with all their imperfections and defects. Remember, one can only know what one is capable of loving. There is no wisdom without love. Unless we learn to love God's creation, we can neither truly love nor truly know God. I roamed the narrow alleys where artisans of all ages toiled in their small, dingy stores. In every place I visited, I overheard the townspeople talk about Rumi. How did it feel, I wondered, to be this popular? How did it affect his ego? My mind busy with these questions, I strolled in the opposite direction from the mosque where Rumi was preaching. Gradually the surroundings began to change. As I moved northward, the houses became more dilapidated, the garden walls falling down, and the children more raucous and unruly. The smells changed, too, getting heavier, more garlicky and spicy. Finally I stepped into a street where three odors loomed in the air: sweat, perfume, and lust. I had reached the seamy side of town. There was a ramshackle house atop the steep cobbled street, the walls supported by bamboo pillars, the roof of thatched grass. In front of the house, a group of women sat chatting. When they saw me approach, they eyed me curiously, looking half amused. Beside them was a garden with roses of every color and shade imaginable and the most amazing smell. I wondered who tended to them. I didn't have to wait too long to learn the answer. No sooner had I reached the garden than the entrance door of the house was flung open and a woman dashed out. She was heavy-jowled, tall, and enormously fat. When she squinted, the way she did now, her eyes were lost in rolls of flesh. She had a thin, dark mustache and thick sideburns. It took me a while to comprehend that she was both man and woman. "What do you want?" the hermaphrodite asked suspiciously. Her face was in constant flux. One moment it looked like the face of a woman. Then the tide came back, replacing it with the face of a man. I introduced myself and asked her name, but she ignored my question. "This is no place for you," she said, waving her hands as if I were a fly she'd like to chase away. "Why not? Don't you see this place as a brothel? Don't you dervishes take an oath to stay away from lust? People think I wallow in sin here, but I give my alms and close my doors in the month of Ramadan. And now I'm saving you. Stay away from us. This is the filthiest corner in town." "Filth is inside, not outside," I objected. "Thus says the rule." "What are you talking about?" she croaked. "It is one of the 40 rules," I tried to explain. "Real filth is the one inside. The rest simply washes off. There is only one type of dirt that cannot be cleansed with pure waters, and that is the stain of hatred and bigotry contaminating the soul. You can purify your body through abstinence and fasting, but only love will purify your heart." The hermaphrodite was having none of it. "You dervishes are out of your minds. I've got all sorts of customers here. But a dervish. When frogs grow beards, if I let you linger, God will raise this place to the ground and put a curse on us for seducing a man of faith." I couldn't help chuckling. Where do you get these ridiculous ideas? Do you think God is an angry, moody patriarch watching us from the skies above so that he can rain stones and frogs on our heads the moment we err? The patron pulled at the ends of her thin mustache, giving me an annoyed look that verged on meanness. Don't worry, I'm not here to visit your brothel, I assured her. I was just admiring your rose garden. Oh, that, the hermaphrodite shrugged dismissively, is the creation of one of my girls, Desert Rose. With that, the patron gestured to a young woman sitting among the harlots ahead of us. Delicate chin, pearl luster skin, and dark almond eyes clouded with worry. She was heartbreakingly beautiful. As I looked at her, I had a sense she was someone in the process of a big transformation. I dropped my voice to a whisper so that only the patron could hear me. That girl is a good girl. One day soon she'll embark on a spiritual journey to find God. She'll abandon this place forever. When that day comes, do not try to stop her. The hermaphrodite looked at me flabbergasted before she burst out, what the hell are you talking about? Nobody is telling me what to do with my girls. You better get the hell out of here. Or else I'm calling Jackal Head. Who's that? I asked. Believe me, you wouldn't want to know, the hermaphrodite said, shaking her finger to emphasize her point. Hearing the name of this stranger made me shiver slightly, but I didn't dwell on it. Anyway, I'm leaving, I said. But I'll come back, so don't be surprised next time you see me around. I'm not one of those pious types who spend their whole lives hunched on prayer rugs while their eyes and hearts remain closed to the outside world. They read the Quran only on the surface. But I read the Quran in the budding flowers and migrating birds. I read the breathing Quran secreted in human beings. You mean you read people? The patron laughed a half-hearted laugh. What kind of nonsense is that? Every man is an open book, each and every one of us a walking Quran. The quest for God is ingrained in the hearts of all, be it a prostitute or a saint. Love exists within each of us from the moment we are born and waits to be discovered from then on. That is what one of the 40 rules is all about. The whole universe is contained within a single human being, you. Everything that you see around, including the things you might not be fond of and even the people you despise or abhor, is present within you in varying degrees. Therefore, do not look for shaitan outside yourself either. The devil is not an extraordinary force that attacks from without. It is an ordinary voice within. If you get to know yourself fully, facing with honesty and hardness both your dark and bright sides, you will arrive at a supreme form of consciousness. When a person knows himself or herself, he or she knows God. Crossing her arms above her chest, the hermaphrodite leaned forward and squinted at me menacingly. A dervish who preaches to harlots, she grunted. I warn you, I'm not going to let you badger anyone around here with your silly ideas. You better stay away from my brothel. Because if you don't, I swear to God, Jackal Head will cut off that sharp tongue of yours and I'll eat it with pleasure. Ella Northampton, May 28, 2008. Befitting her general mood, Ella woke up sad. But not sad as in weepy and unhappy, only sad as in unwilling to smile and take things lightly. She felt as though she had reached a milestone she was not prepared for. As she was brewing coffee in the kitchen, she took her list of resolutions out of the drawer and scanned through it. 10 things to do before turning 41. Improve your time management, be better organized, and be determined to make the most of your time. Buy a new day planner. Accomplished 2. Add mineral supplements and antioxidants to your diet. Accomplished 3. Take action for fewer wrinkles. Try alpha hydroxy products, and start using the new L'Oreal cream. Accomplished 4. Change the upholstery, buy new plants, get new cushions. Accomplished 5. Evaluate your life, values, and beliefs. Half accomplished 6. Eliminate meat from your diet, make a healthy menu every week, and start giving your body the respect it deserves. Half accomplished 7. Start reading Rumi's poems. Accomplished 8. Take the kids to a Broadway musical. Accomplished 9. Start writing a cookbook. Unaccomplished 10. Open your heart to love. Ella stood still, her eyes fixed on the 10th item on her list, not knowing whether to put a check next to it or not. She didn't even know what she'd meant when she wrote that. What was she thinking? It must be the effect of sweet blasphemy, she murmured to herself. Lately she found herself frequently thinking about love. Dear Aziz, today is my birthday. I feel like I have reached a milestone in my life. They say turning 40 is a defining moment, especially for women. They also say that 40 is the new 30 and 60 is the new 40, but as much as I'd like to believe all that, it sounds too far-fetched to me. I mean, who are we kidding? 40 is 40. I guess now I'll have more of everything, more knowledge, more wisdom, and of course more wrinkles and gray hair. Birthdays have always made me happy, but this morning I woke up with heaviness in my chest, asking questions too large for someone who hadn't even had her morning coffee yet. I kept wondering, is the way I've lived my life the way I want to continue from now on? And then a fearful feeling came over me. What if both a yes and a no might generate equally disastrous consequences? So I found another answer. Maybe. Warm wishes, Ella. P.S. Sorry I couldn't write a more cheerful email. I don't know why I'm down in the dumps today. I can't give you a reason. That is, other than turning 40. I guess this is what they call midlife crisis. Dear Ella, happy birthday. 40 is a most beautiful age for both men and women. Did you know that in mystic thought 40 symbolizes the ascent from one level to a higher one and spiritual awakening? When we mourn for 40 days. When a baby is born it takes 40 days for him to get ready to start life on earth. And when we are in love we need to wait for 40 days to be sure of our feelings. The flood of Noah lasted 40 days, and while the waters destroyed life, they also washed all impurity away and enabled human beings to make a new, fresh start. In Islamic mysticism there are 40 degrees between man and God. Likewise, there are 4 basic stages of consciousness and 10 degrees in each, making 40 levels in total. Jesus went into the wilderness for 40 days and nights. Muhammad was 40 years old when he received the call to become a prophet. Buddha meditated under a linden tree for 40 days. Not to mention the 40 rules of Shams. You receive a new mission at 40, a new lease on life. You have reached a most auspicious number. Congratulations. And don't worry about getting old. There are no wrinkles or gray hair strong enough to defy the power of 40. Warmly, Aziz. Desert Rose. The Harlot. Konya, October 17, 1244. Brothels have existed since the beginning of time. And so have women like me. But there is something that amazes me. Why is it that although people say they hate seeing women prostitute themselves, the same people make life hard for a prostitute who wants to repent and start life anew? It is as if they are telling us they are sorry that we have fallen so low, but now that we are where we are, we should stay there forever. I don't know why this is. All I know is, some people feed on the miseries of others and they don't like it when there is one less miserable person on the face of the earth. But no matter what they say or do, I am going to walk out of this place one day. This morning I woke up bursting with a desire to listen to the great Rumi preach. Had I told the patron the truth and asked permission, she would have made fun of me. Since when do whores go to mosques? She would have said, laughing so hard her round face would have turned crimson. That's why I lied. After that hairless dervish left, the patron looked so preoccupied I sensed it was the right time to go and talk. She is always more approachable when distracted. I told her I needed to go to the bazaar to run some errands. She believed me. After 9 years of my working like a dog for her, she does. Only on one condition, she said. Sesame is coming with you. That wasn't a problem. I liked Sesame. A big, hefty man with the mind of a child, he was reliable and honest to the point of simplicity. How he survived in such a cruel world was a mystery to me. Nobody knew what his real name was, perhaps not even himself. We had named him so because of his infatuation with Sesame Halva. When a harlot from the brothel needed to go out, Sesame accompanied her like a silent shadow. He was the best guard I could have wished for. The two of us took the dusty road winding through the orchards. When we reached the first intersection, I asked Sesame to wait for me, and I disappeared behind a bush where I had hidden a bag full of men's clothes. It was harder than I thought to dress up as a man. Wrapping long scarves around my breasts, I flattened my chest. Then I put on baggy trousers, a cotton vest, a long maroon robe, and a turban. Finally I covered half my face with a scarf, hoping to resemble an Arab traveler. When I walked back toward him, Sesame flinched, looking puzzled. Let's go, I urged him, and when he didn't budge, I uncovered my face. My dear, haven't you recognized me? Desert Rose, is that you? Sesame exclaimed, putting one hand on his mouth like a child in awe. Why did you dress up like that? Can you keep a secret? Sesame nodded, his eyes widening with excitement. All right, I whispered. We are going to a mosque. But don't tell the patron. Sesame's bottom lip quivered. No, no, we were going to the bazaar. Yes, dear, later. First we are going to listen to the great Rumi. Sesame panicked slightly, as I knew he would. The change in plans was unsettling to him. Please, this means a lot to me, I begged. If you agree and promise not to tell anyone about it, I'll buy you a huge chunk of halva. Halva. Sesame clucked his tongue with delight, as if the word alone had left a sweet taste in his mouth. And with sweet expectation, we set off toward the mosque where Rumi was going to speak. I was born in a small village near Nicaea. My mother always said to me, you were born in the right place, but I am afraid it was under the wrong star. The times were bad, unpredictable. From one year to the next, nothing remained the same. First there were rumors of the Crusaders coming back. We heard terrible stories about the atrocities they committed in Constantinople, ransacking the mansions, demolishing the icons inside chapels and churches. Next we heard about Seljuk attacks. And before the tales of terror of the Seljuk army faded, those of the ruthless Mongols started. The name and the face of the enemy changed, but the fear of being destroyed by outsiders remained as steady as snow on Mount Ida. My parents were bakers and good Christians. One of my earliest memories is the smell of bread out of the oven. We weren't rich, even as a child, I knew that. But we weren't poor either. I had seen the stare in the eyes of the poor when they came to the bakery begging for crumbs. Every night before going to sleep, I thanked the Lord for not sending me to bed hungry. It felt like talking to a friend. For back then God was my friend. When I was 7, my mother became pregnant. Looking back today, I suspect she might have had several miscarriages before that, but I didn't know anything about such things. I was so innocent that if anyone asked me how babies were made, I would have said God needed them out of soft, sweet dough. But the bread baby that God needed for my mother must have been enormous, because before long her belly swelled up, big and tight. Mother had become so huge she could barely move. The midwife said her body was retaining water, but that didn't sound like a bad thing to me. What neither my mother nor the midwife knew was, there wasn't one baby but 3. All were boys. My brothers had waged a war inside my mother's body. One of the triplets had strangled his brother with his umbilical cord, and as if to take revenge, the dead baby had blocked the passage, thus preventing the others from coming out. For 4 days my mother remained in labor. Night and day we listened to her screams until we heard her no more. Unable to save my mother, the midwife did her best to save my brothers. Taking a pair of scissors, she cut my mom's belly open, but in the end only one baby survived. This is how my brother was born. My father never forgave him, and when the baby was baptized, he did not attend the ceremony. With my mother gone and my father turned into a sullen, bitter man, life was never the same. Things rapidly deteriorated at the bakery. We lost our customers. Afraid of becoming poor and having to beg someday, I started to hide bread rolls under my bed, where they would get dry and stale. But it was my brother who really suffered. I at least had been loved and taken good care of in the past. He never had any of that. It broke my heart to see him being mistreated, and yet a part of me was relieved, even grateful, that it wasn't I who had become the target of my father's fury. I wish I had protected my brother. Everything would be different then, and I wouldn't be in a brothel in Konya today. Life is so strange. A year later my father remarried. The only difference in my brother's life was that whereas before it was my father who ill-treated him, now it was my father and his new wife who did so. He started to run away from home, only to come back with the worst habits and the wrong friends. One day my father beat him so badly he almost killed him. After that, the boy changed. There was a cold, cruel stare in his eyes that wasn't there before. I knew he had something in mind, but it never occurred to me what a horrible plan he was brewing. I wish I had known. I wish I could have prevented the tragedy. Then, one morning in spring, my father and stepmother were found dead, killed with rat poison. As soon as the incident became public, everyone suspected my brother. When the guards started asking questions, he ran away in panic. I never saw him again. And just like that, I was alone in the world. Unable to stay at home where I still sensed my mother's smell, unable to work at the bakery where disturbing memories hovered in the air, I decided to go to Constantinople to stay with an old spinster aunt who had now become my closest relative. I was 13. I took a carriage to Constantinople. I was the youngest passenger on board and the only one traveling alone. A few hours on the road, we were stopped by a gang of robbers. They took everything: suitcases, clothes, boots, belts, and jewelry, even the driver's sausages. Having nothing to give them, I stood aside quietly, certain that they would do me no harm. But just when they were about to leave, the gang leader turned to me and asked, "Are you a virgin, dainty thing?" I blushed and refused to answer such an improper question. Little did I know that my blushing was the answer he wanted. "Let's go," the gang leader shouted. "Take the horses and the girl." While I resisted them in tears, none of the other passengers even tried to help me. The robbers took me to a thick, dense forest, where I was surprised to see they had created a whole village. There were women and children. Ducks, goats, and pigs were all over the place. It looked like an idyllic village, except it was inhabited by criminals. Soon I understood why the gang leader had asked me if I was a virgin. The chief of the village was severely ill with nervous fever. He had been in bed for a long time, with red spots all over his body, trying countless treatments to no avail. Recently someone had convinced him that if he slept with a virgin, his illness would be transmitted to her and he would be clean and cured. There are things in my life I don't want to remember. My time in the forest is one of them. Even today, whenever the forest comes to my mind, I think of the pine trees and only the pine trees. I preferred sitting alone under those trees to the company of the women in the village, most of whom were the wives or daughters of the robbers. There were also a number of harlots who had come there on their own. I couldn't understand for the life of me why they didn't run away. I was determined to do so. There were carriages crossing the forest, most of them belonging to the nobility. It was a mystery to me why they were not robbed, until I realized that some carriage drivers bribed the robbers before passing through the forest and in return got the right to travel safely. Once I figured out how things worked, I cut my own deal. After stopping a carriage heading to the big city, I pleaded with the driver to take me with him. He asked too much money, although he knew I had none. I paid him the only way I knew how. Only long after I arrived in Constantinople would I comprehend why the harlots in the forest would never run away. The city was worse. It was ruthless. I never looked for my old aunt. Now that I was fallen, I knew a proper lady like her wouldn't want me. I was on my own. It didn't take the city long to crush my spirits and ruin my body. Suddenly I was in another world altogether, a world of malice, rape, brutality, and disease. I had successive abortions until I was damaged so badly that I stopped having periods and could no longer conceive. I saw things on those streets for which I have no words. After I left the city, I traveled with soldiers, performers, and gypsies, serving the needs of all. Then a man called Jackalhead found me and brought me to this brothel in Konya. The patron wasn't interested in where I came from as long as I was in good shape. She was delighted to learn I couldn't have babies and would not cause her any problems in that respect. To refer to my barrenness, she named me Desert, and to embellish that name somewhat, she added Rose, which was fine with me, as I adored roses. Which is how I think of faith. Like a hidden rose garden where I once roamed and inhaled its perfumed smells but can no longer enter. I want God to be my friend again. With that longing I am circling that garden, searching for an entrance, hoping to find a gate that will let me in. When Sesame and I reached the mosque, I couldn't believe my eyes. Men of all ages and professions occupied every corner, even the place in the back that would normally be reserved for women. I was about to give up and leave when I noticed a beggar relinquish his seat and inch his way out. Thanking my lucky stars, I wriggled into his space, leaving Sesame outside. This is how I found myself listening to the great Rumi in a mosque full of men. I didn't even want to think what could happen if they found out there was a woman amid them, let alone a harlot. Chasing off all dark thoughts, I gave my full attention to the sermon. God created suffering so that joy might appear through its opposite, Rumi said. Things become manifest through opposites. Since God has no opposite, he remains hidden. As the preacher talked, His voice rose and swelled like a mountain stream fed by the melting snow. Look at the abasement of the earth and the exaltation of the heavens. Know that all the states of the world are like this, flooding and drought, peace and war. Whatever happens, do not forget, nothing God has created is in vain, whether wrath or forbearance, honesty or guile. Sitting there, I saw that everything served a purpose. My mother's pregnancy and the war in her womb, my brother's incurable loneliness, even the murder of my father and stepmother, my dreadful days in the forest, and every brutality I saw on the streets of Constantinople. They each contributed, in their own way, to my story. Behind all hardships was a larger scheme. I couldn't make it out clearly, but I could feel it with my whole heart. Listening to Rumi in a packed mosque on that afternoon, I felt a cloud of tranquility descend over me, as delightful and soothing as the sight of my mother baking bread. Hassan the Beggar, Konya, October 17, 1244. Bristling with irritation, I sat under the maple tree. I continued to be angry at Rumi for his flamboyant speech on suffering, a subject he clearly knew little about. The shadow of the minaret inched its way across the street. Half dozing, half eyeing the passers-by, I was about to fall asleep when I caught sight of a dervish I had never seen before. Dressed in black rags, holding a large staff in his hand, with no facial hair and a tiny silver earring in one ear, he looked so different that I couldn't help fixing my gaze upon him. As his eyes scanned left and right, it didn't take the dervish long to notice me. Instead of ignoring my presence, the way people who saw me for the first time always did, he put his right hand on his heart and greeted me as if we were two old friends. I was so stunned I looked around just to make sure he wasn't greeting someone else. But there was only me and the maple tree. Dazed, confused, I nonetheless put my hand on my heart and greeted him back. Slowly the dervish walked toward me. I lowered my gaze, expecting him to leave a copper coin in my bowl or hand me a piece of bread. But instead he knelt down to my eye level. "Selamun alaikum, beggar," he said. "Alaikum salam, dervish," I responded. My voice sounded hoarse and strange to me. It had been such a long time since I'd felt the need to speak to anyone that I had almost forgotten what my voice sounded like. He introduced himself as Shams of Tabriz and asked my name. I laughed. "What does a man like me need a name for? Everybody has a name," he objected. "God has countless names. Of those, only 99 are known to us. If God has so many names, how can a human being who is the very reflection of him go around without a name?" I didn't know how to respond to that and so didn't even try. Instead I conceded, "I had a wife and a mother once. They used to call me Hassan." "Hassan it is, then." The dervish nodded. Then, to my surprise, he gave me a silver mirror. "Keep it," he said. "A good man in Baghdad gave it to me, but you need it more than I do. It will remind you that you bear God within you." Before I found the chance to say anything in return, a commotion broke out in the background. The first thing that came to my mind was that a pickpocket had been caught in the mosque. But when the shouts grew louder and fiercer, I knew that it had to be something bigger. No pickpocket would create such an uproar. We found out soon enough. A woman, a known prostitute, had been found in the mosque dressed up as a man. A group of people were shoving her out, chanting, "Lash the deceiver. Lash the whore." In this state the angry mob reached the street. I caught sight of the young woman in men's clothing. Her face was pale as death and her almond eyes terrified. I had seen many lynchings before. It never ceased to amaze me how dramatically people changed when they joined a mob. Ordinary men with no history of violence, artisans, vendors, or peddlers, turned aggressive to the point of murder when they banded together. Lynchings were common and ended with the corpses put on display to deter others. "Poor woman," I muttered to Shams of Tabriz, but when I turned to him for a response, there was no one standing there. I caught sight of the dervish darting toward the mob, like a flaming arrow shot straight up into the sky. I jumped to my feet and rushed to catch up with him. When he reached the head of the procession, Shams raised his staff like a flag and yelled at the top of his voice, "Stop it, people! Halt!" Baffled, and suddenly silent, the men stared at him in wonder. "You should all be ashamed of yourselves," Shams of Tabriz shouted as he struck the ground with his staff. 30 men against one woman. "Is that fair? She doesn't deserve fairness," said a square-faced, burly man with a lazy eye, who seemed to have proclaimed himself the leader of this impromptu group. I recognized him instantly. He was a security guard named Baybars, a man all the beggars in town knew well for his cruelty and rapacity. "This woman here dressed up as a man and sneaked into the mosque to deceive good Muslims," Baybars said. "Are you telling me you want to punish a person for going into a mosque? Is that a crime?" Shams of Tabriz asked, his voice dripping with scorn. The question created a momentary lull. Apparently nobody had thought of it that way. "She is a whore," yelled another man, who looked so enraged that his face had turned a dark scarlet color. "She has no place in a holy mosque." That seemed enough to inflame the group again. "Whore, whore," a few people at the back chanted in unison. "Let's get the whore." As if that were an order, a young lad leapt forward and grabbed the woman's turban, yanking it forcefully. The turban came loose, and the woman's long blonde hair, bright as sunflowers, fell down in graceful waves. We all held our breath, astonished by her youth and beauty. Shams must have recognized the mixed feelings in the air, for he reproached them without skipping a beat. "You have to make up your minds, brothers. Do you really despise this woman, or do you in fact desire her?" With that, the dervish caught the harlot's hand and pulled her toward him, away from the young lad and the mob. She hid behind him, like a little girl hiding behind her mother's skirts. "You are making a big mistake," the leader of the group said, raising his voice above the murmur of the crowd. "You are a stranger in this town and don't know our ways. Stay out of this matter." Someone else chimed in. "What kind of a dervish are you anyway? Don't you have anything better to do than to defend the interests of a whore?" Shams of Tabriz was quiet for a moment, as if considering the questions. He displayed no temper, remaining invariably tranquil. Then he said, "But how did you notice her in the first place? You go to a mosque but pay more attention to the people around you than to God. If you were the good believers you claim to be, you would not have noticed this woman even if she were naked. Now, go back to the sermon and do a better job this time." An awkward silence descended on the entire street. Leaves skittered along the sidewalk, and for a moment they were the only things that moved. "Come on, you lot. Off you go, back to the sermon." Shams of Tabriz waved his staff, shooing the men away like flies. They did not all turn and walk away, but they did take a few steps back, swaying unsteadily, puzzled as to what to do next. A few of them were looking in the direction of the mosque as if considering returning. It was exactly then that the harlot mustered the courage to get out from behind the dervish. Fast as a rabbit, she took to her heels, her long hair flying every which way while she scurried into the closest side street. Only 2 men attempted to chase her. But Shams of Tabriz blocked their path, swinging his staff under their feet with such suddenness and force that they tumbled over and fell down. A few passers-by laughed at the sight, and so did I. Embarrassed and stupefied, the 2 men managed to get to their feet again, but by that time the harlot had long vanished and the dervish was walking away, his work here done. Suleiman the Drunk Konya, October 17, 1244. Before the commotion I was snoozing peacefully with my back to the tavern wall, and then the racket outside made me nearly jump out of my skin. "What's going on?" I screamed as my eyes snapped open. "Did the Mongols attack us?" There was a ripple of laughter. I turned around and found several other customers making fun of me. "Dirty bastards. Don't you worry, old drunk," yelled Haristus, the tavern owner. "No Mongols coming after you. It's Rumi passing by with an army of admirers." I went to the window and looked out. Sure enough, there they were, an excited procession of disciples and admirers repeatedly chanting, "God is great. God is great." In the middle of it all was the erect figure of Rumi, mounted on a white horse, radiating strength and confidence. I opened the window, ducked my head out, and watched them. Moving at a pace no faster than a snail's, the procession came very near. In fact, some of the crowd were so close that I could easily have touched a few heads. Suddenly I had a brilliant idea. I was going to snatch off some people's turbans. I grabbed the wooden back scratcher that belongs to Haristus. Holding the window open with one hand and the scratcher in the other, I leaned forward, managing to reach the turban of a man in the crowd. I was just about to pull the turban off when another man inadvertently looked up and saw me. "Selamun alaikum," I saluted, smiling from ear to ear. "A Muslim in a tavern. Shame on you," the man roared. Don't you know wine is the handiwork of Shaitan? I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could make a sound, something sharp whizzed by my head. I realized in sheer horror that it was a stone. If I hadn't ducked at the last second, it would have cracked my skull. Instead it had shot through the open window, landing on the table of the Persian merchant sitting behind me. Too tipsy to comprehend what had happened, the merchant held the stone in his hand, examining it as if it were an obscure message from the skies. "Suleiman, close that window and go back to your table," Haristus bellowed, his voice hoarse with worry. "Did you see what happened?" I said as I staggered back toward my table. "Someone hurled a stone at me. They could have killed me." Haristus raised an eyebrow. "I'm sorry, but what were you expecting? Don't you know there are people who don't want to see a Muslim in a tavern? And here you are displaying yourself, reeking of alcohol, your nose glowing like a red lantern." So what?" I stuttered. "Am I not a human being?" Haristus patted me on the shoulder as if to say, "Don't be so touchy. You know, this is exactly why I abhor religion. All sorts of them. Religious people are so confident of having God by their side that they think they are superior to everyone else," I said. Haristus did not respond. He was a religious man, but also a skilled tavern owner who knew how to soothe an incensed customer. He brought me another carafe of red wine and watched me as I guzzled it. Outside, a wild wind blew, slamming shut the windows and scattering dry leaves left and right. For a moment we stood still, listening carefully, as if there were a melody to be heard. "I don't understand why wine was forbidden in this world but promised in heaven," I said. "If it's as bad as they claim, why would they serve it in paradise?" "Questions, questions," Haristus murmured as he threw his hands up. "You are always full of questions. Do you have to question everything?" "Of course I do. That's why we were given a brain, don't you think? Suleiman, I have known you for a long time. You are not just any customer to me. You are my friend, and I worry about you." "I'll be fine," I said, but Haristus interrupted me. "You are a good man, but your tongue is as sharp as a dagger. That's what worries me. There are all sorts of people in Konya. And it's no secret that some of them don't think highly of a Muslim who has taken to drink. You need to learn to be careful in public. Hide your ways, and watch what you say." I grinned. "May we top off this speech with a poem from Khayyam?" Haristus heaved a sigh, but the Persian merchant who had overheard me exclaimed cheerfully, "Yes, we want a poem from Khayyam." Other customers joined in, giving me a big round of applause. Motivated and slightly provoked, I jumped onto a table and began to recite, "Did God set grapes a-growing, do you think, and at the same time make it a sin to drink?" The Persian merchant yelled, "Of course not. That wouldn't make any sense. Give thanks to him who foreordained it thus. Surely he loves to hear the glasses clink." If there was one thing these many years of drinking had taught me, it was that different people drank differently. I knew people who drank gallons every night, and all they did was get merry, sing songs, and then doze off. But then there were others who turned into monsters with a few drops. If the same drink made some merry and tipsy and others wicked and aggressive, shouldn't we hold the drinkers responsible instead of the drink? Drink, for you know not whence you came, nor why. Drink, for you know not why you go, nor where. Another round of applause followed. Even Haristus joined the excitement. In the Jewish quarter of Konya, in a tavern owned by a Christian, we, a mixed bunch of wine lovers of all faiths, raised our glasses and toasted together, hard though it was to believe, to a God who could love and forgive us even when we ourselves clearly failed to do so. Ella Northampton, May 31, 2008, "Better safe than sorry," said the website. Check his shirts for lipstick stains, see if he comes home smelling of unfamiliar perfumes. This was the first time Ella Rubinstein had taken an online test, titled, "How to Tell If Your Husband is Cheating on You." Although she found the questions tacky, by now she knew that life itself could occasionally feel like one big cliché. In spite of her final test score, Ella didn't want to confront David on this matter. She still had not asked him where he'd been on the nights he hadn't come home. These days she spent most of her time reading Sweet Blasphemy, using the novel as an excuse to cover up her silence. Her mind was so distracted that it was taking her longer than usual to finish the book. Still, she was enjoying the story, and with every new rule of Shams's she mulled her life over. When the children were around, she acted normal. They acted normal. However, the moment she and David were alone, she caught her husband looking at her curiously, as if wondering what kind of wife would avoid asking her husband where he'd spent the night. But the truth was that Ella didn't want a piece of information she wouldn't know how to handle. The less she knew about her husband's flings, the less they would occupy her mind, she thought. It was true what they say about ignorance. It was bliss. The only time that bliss had been disrupted was last Christmas, when a survey from a local hotel arrived in their mailbox, addressed directly to David. Customer service wanted to know whether he was happy with his stays. Ella left the letter on the table, on top of a pile of mail, and that evening she watched him take the letter out of the opened envelope and read it. Ah, a guest evaluation form. The last thing I needed, David said, managing a half smile for her. We held a dental conference there last year. They must have included all the participants on their customer list. She believed him. At least the part of her that didn't like to rock the boat did. The other part of her was cynical and distrustful. It was that same part that the next day found the hotel's number and dialed it, just to hear what she already knew. Neither this year nor the one before had they ever hosted a dental conference. Deep inside, Ella blamed herself. She hadn't aged well, and she'd gained considerable weight over the last 6 years. With every new pound, her sexual drive had declined a bit further. The cooking classes rendered it more difficult to shed the extra pounds, though there were women in her group who cooked more often, and better, and still remained half her size. When she looked back at her life, she realized that rebellion had never suited her. She had never smoked weed with boys behind closed doors, gotten kicked out of bars, used morning after pills, thrown fits, or lied to her mother. Never cut class. Never had teen sex. All around her, girls her age were having abortions or putting their out-of-wedlock babies up for adoption, while she observed their stories as though watching a TV program on famine in Ethiopia. It saddened Ella that such tragedies were unfolding in the world, but the truth was that she never saw herself as sharing the same universe with those unfortunate ones. She had never been a party girl, not even as a teenager. She preferred to sit at home and read a good book on a Friday night rather than whoop it up with strangers at some wild party. Why can't you be like Ella? The mothers in the neighborhood asked their daughters. See, she never gets herself in trouble. While their mothers adored her, the kids themselves saw her as a nerd with no sense of humor. No wonder she wasn't very popular in high school. Once a classmate told her, "You know what your problem is. You take life so seriously. You're fucking boring." She listened carefully and said she would think about that. Even her hairstyle hadn't changed much over the years. Long, straight, honey blonde hair that she pulled into an unrelenting bun or braided down her back. She wore little makeup, just a touch of reddish-brown lipstick and a moss-green eyeliner, which according to her daughter did more to hide than to bring out the gray-blue of her eyes. In any event, she never managed to draw two perfectly curved lines with the eyeliner and often went out with the line on one eyelid looking thicker than that on the other. Ella suspected that there must be something wrong with her. She was either too intrusive and pushy with regard to Jeanette's marriage plans or too passive and docile with regard to her husband's flings. There was an Ella the control freak and an Ella the hopelessly meek. She could never tell which one was about to emerge, or when. And then there was a third Ella, observing everything quietly, waiting for her time to come. It was this Ella who told her she was calm to the point of numbness but that underneath there was a strangled self, harboring a fast freshet of anger and rebellion. If she kept going like this, the third Ella warned, she was bound to explode someday. It was just a matter of time. Contemplating these issues on the last day of May, Ella did something she hadn't done in a long while. She prayed. She asked God to either provide her with a love that would absorb her whole being or else make her tough and careless enough not to mind the absence of love in her life. Whichever one you choose, please be quick, she added as an afterthought. You might have forgotten, but I'm already 40. And as you can see, I don't carry my years well. Desert Rose the Harlot Konya, October 17, 1244. Breathless, I ran and ran along the narrow alley, unable to look back. My lungs burning, my chest pounding. When I finally reached the busy bazaar, I dodged behind a wall, almost collapsing. Only then could I muster the courage to look behind me. To my great surprise and relief, there was only one person following me, Sesame. He stopped beside me, out of breath, his hands dangling limply at his sides, his expression bewildered and vexed, unable to comprehend why all of a sudden I had started running like crazy through the streets of Konya. Everything had happened so fast that it was only in the bazaar that I could put the pieces together. 1 minute I was sitting in the mosque, absorbed in the sermon, drinking in Rumi's pearls of wisdom. In my trance I failed to notice that the lad next to me had accidentally stepped on the ends of the scarf covering my face. Before I knew it, the scarf came loose and my turban slid aside, exposing my face and a bit of my hair. I fixed the scarf swiftly and continued listening to Rumi, confident that nobody had noticed anything. But when I raised my eyes again, I saw a young man in the front row looking at me intently. Square face, lazy eye, sharp nose, sneering mouth. I recognized him. He was Baybars. Baybars was one of those pesky customers none of the girls in the brothel wanted to sleep with. Some men have a way of wanting to sleep with prostitutes and yet at the same time insulting them. He was such a man. Always cracking lewd jokes, he had a terrible temper. Once he beat a girl so badly that even the boss, who loved money more than anything, had to ask him to leave and never come back. But he kept returning, at least for a few more months. Then, for some reason unbeknownst to me, he stopped visiting the brothel, and we didn't hear from him again. Now there he was, sitting in the front row, having grown a full beard like a devout man but still with the same fierce sparkle in his eyes. I averted my gaze, but it was too late. He had recognized me. Baybars whispered something to the man next to him, and then the two of them turned around and stared at me. Next they pointed me out to someone else, and one after another all the men in that row stared in my direction. I felt my face blush and my heart race, but I couldn't budge. Instead I clung to the childish hope that if I stayed still and closed my eyes, the darkness would engulf us all, leaving nothing to worry about. When I dared to open my eyes again, Baybars was pushing his way through the crowd toward me. I made a dash for the door, but it was impossible to escape, surrounded as I was by a thick sea of people. In a flash Baybars had reached me, so menacingly close I could smell his breath. Grabbing me by the arm, he said between clenched teeth, "What is a harlot doing here? Don't you have any shame? Please, please, let me go," I stammered, but I don't think he even heard me. His friends joined him. Tough, scary, confident, disdainful fellows, reeking of anger and vinegar, raining insults on me. Everyone around turned to see what the commotion was about, and a few people tisk-tisked disapprovingly, but nobody intervened. My body as listless as a lump of dough, I meekly let them push me toward the exit. Once we reached the street, I hoped Sesame would come to my aid, and if worst came to worst, I would run away. But no sooner had we stepped into the street than the men grew more belligerent and aggressive. I realized in horror that in the mosque, out of respect for the preacher and the community, they had been careful not to raise their voices or shove me around, but outside on the street there was nothing to stop them. I had been through harder things in my life, and yet I doubt if I had ever felt so dejected before. After years of hesitation, today I had taken a step toward God, and how had he responded? By kicking me out of his house. I should never have gone there, I said to Sesame, my voice cracking like thin ice. They're right, you know. A harlot has no place in a mosque or a church or in any of his houses. Don't say that. When I turned around to see who had said this, I couldn't believe my eyes. It was him, the wandering hairless dervish. Sesame broke into a wide smile, delighted to see him again. I lurched forward to kiss his hands, but he stopped me midway. Please don't. But how can I thank you? I owe you so much, I beseeched. He shrugged and looked uninterested. You owe me nothing, he said. We are indebted to no other than him. He introduced himself as Shams of Tabriz and then said the strangest thing ever. Some people start life with a perfectly glowing aura but then lose color and fade. You seem to be one of them. Once your aura was whiter than lilies with specks of yellow and pink, but it faded over time. Now it is a pale brown. Don't you miss your original colors? Wouldn't you like to unite with your essence? I looked at him, feeling utterly lost in his words. Your aura has lost its shine because all these years you have convinced yourself that you are dirty inside and out. I am dirty, I said, biting my lip. Don't you know what I do for a living? Allow me to tell you a story, Shams said. And this is what he told me. One day a prostitute passed by a street dog. The animal was panting under the hot sun, thirsty and helpless. The prostitute immediately took off her shoe and filled it with water from the nearest well for the dog. Then she went on her way. The next day she ran into a Sufi who was a man of great wisdom. As soon as he saw her, he kissed her hands. She was shocked. But he told her that her kindness toward the dog had been so genuine that all her sins had been pardoned there and then. I understood what Shams of Tabriz was trying to tell me, but something inside me refused to believe him. So I said, let me assure you, even if I fed all the dogs in Konya, it wouldn't be enough for my redemption. You cannot know that, only God can. Besides, what makes you think any of those men who pushed you out of the mosque today are closer to God? Even if they are not closer to God, I replied, unconvinced, who will tell them that? Will you? But the dervish shook his head. No, that's not the way the system works. It is you who needs to tell it to them. Do you think they would listen to me? Those men hate me. They will listen, he said determinedly. Because there is no such thing as them, just as there is no I. All you need to do is keep in mind how everything and everyone in this universe is interconnected. We are not hundreds and thousands of different beings. We are all one. I waited for him to explain, but instead he continued, it's one of the 40 rules. If you want to change the way others treat you, you should first change the way you treat yourself. Unless you learn to love yourself, fully and sincerely, there is no way you can be loved. Once you achieve that stage, however, be thankful for every thorn that others might throw at you. It is a sign that you will soon be showered in roses. He paused briefly and then added, how can you blame others for disrespecting you when you think of yourself as unworthy of respect? I stood there unable to say a word as I felt my grip on what was real slip away. I thought about all the men I had slept with, the way they smelled, the way their calloused hands felt, the way they cried when they came. I had seen nice boys turn into monsters and monsters turn into nice boys. Once I had a customer who had the habit of spitting on prostitutes while he had sex with them. Dirty, he would say as he spit into my mouth and all over my face. You dirty whore. And here was this dervish telling me I was cleaner than fresh spring water. It felt like a tasteless joke, but when I forced myself to laugh, the sound didn't pass through my throat, and I ended up suppressing a sob. The past is a whirlpool. If you let it dominate your present moment, it will suck you in, said Shams as if he had read my thoughts. Time is just an illusion. What you need is to live this very moment. That is all that matters. Upon saying that, he took out a silk handkerchief from the inside pocket of his robe. Keep it, he said. A good man in Baghdad gave it to me, but you need it more than I do. It will remind you that your heart is pure and that you bear God within you. With that, the dervish grabbed his staff and stood up, ready to go. Just walk out of that brothel. Where? How? I have no place to go. That's not a problem, Shams said, his eyes gleaming. Fret not where the road will take you. Instead concentrate on the first step. That's the hardest part and that's what you are responsible for. Once you take that step, let everything do what it naturally does and the rest will follow. Do not go with the flow. Be the flow. I nodded. I didn't need to ask in order to understand that this, too, was one of the rules. Suleiman the Drunk Konya, October 17, 1244. Before midnight I downed my last drink and left the tavern. Remember what I said. Watch your tongue, Haristus cautioned as he waved goodbye. I nodded, feeling fortunate to have a friend who cared about me. But as soon as I stepped into the dark, empty street, I was seized by a kind of exhaustion such as I had never felt before. I wished I had taken a bottle of wine with me. I could have used a drink. As I tottered with my boots clacking on the broken cobblestones, the sight of the men in Rumi's procession crossed my mind. It pained me to recall the flicker of loathing in their eyes. If there was one thing I hated most in the world, it was prudishness. I had been reprimanded by prim and proper people so many times that even the memory of them was enough to send a shiver down my spine. Struggling with these thoughts, I turned a corner and entered a side street. It was darker here because of the massive trees towering above. As if that weren't enough, the moon suddenly hid behind a cloud, shrouding me in thick, dense darkness. Otherwise I would have noticed the two security guards approaching me. Selam alaikum, I chimed, my voice coming out too merrily in the attempt to hide my anxiety. But the guards didn't return my greeting. Instead they asked me what I was doing out on the streets at this late hour. Just walking, I mumbled. We stood face to face, anchored in an awkward silence pierced only by the howling of dogs far away. One of the men took a step toward me and sniffed the air. "It stinks around here," he blurted out. "Yeah, it reeks of wine," the other guard confirmed. I decided to treat the situation lightly. "Don't worry yourselves. The stench is only metaphorical.